Hey everyone, this is Wes Coughlin with XProHeli, and this is a screencast tutorial on how to do the post-production work with your aerial videos shot with your, XP2 Quadcopter, GoPro Hero camera using Adobe Premiere CS6. Now, this tutorial is not going to be showing you how to do necessarily video editing on your computer, but I will go through all the necessary steps on how to set up your project correctly to edit aerial video footage shot at 60 frames a second, playing back at 30, and also doing some warp stabilizer effects with some speed changes to your clips. And we'll also show the correct way to export and do all that jazz with your stuff. So the clips we're going to be working with today is some clips that I shot in Belize in December, and this is some GoPro Hero 3 footage just kind of flying around off of a beach in Placencia. I think I really only got one good shot in this angle, that one. But what I'm going to do is show you my process of how I go about doing this. Now, because I'm using the GoPro Hero 3, we have it set in Pro Tune mode, which gives us a higher bit rate per second. So instead of shooting at around like 15 megabits a second, we're shooting more like about 30 to 35 megabits per second, which is great because we get more detail in the footage, but it's also bad because we're using the H.264 compression on the video, and so this video has a lot more information in it, and your computer has to work a lot harder to decode that information. And even though I'm using a newer Mac Pro computer, the graphics card on it does not do as fast of H.264 processing as I would like it, so this new GoPro Hero 3 footage plays back pretty choppy. Even when I go into Premiere and work with Premiere and its Mercury playback engine, it still plays back kind of choppy. So what I like to do at this point is I like to open up the Adobe Media Encoder CS6, and I'm actually just going to convert my GoPro footage to a QuickTime 422 file. Now this is essentially the same process as if you opened the GoPro Studio application and you converted your GoPro footage to Cineform, which might be a better option for those people who don't have the QuickTime Pro codecs like the 422. But I like the QuickTime 422 mainly because it's a little bit smaller file size from the Cineform files. The Cineform files are great, but what this does is we're essentially uncompressing our video. We're not really gaining any quality, but this uncompression is going to save us a lot of time, at least for me on my system, to do the editing. And I can already tell right now doing the screencast recording that things are moving pretty slow. So I'm going to drag these clips into the media encoder and do a batch transcode. And I'm going to convert these to a QuickTime video, and it's going to be ProRes 422 1080p 59.4 frames a second. I already have a preset made for this. So what this is going to do, I'll just create a new folder in here and call it 422. And we can select these guys and move them to the 422 folder. So essentially I'm just transcoding my video into an easier format to edit with. And really the GoPro Hero 3 is the only footage that I do this with. And it's mainly because my computer has a hard time uncompressing the footage and reading it back. So I also, shoot a lot with the DSLR style cameras or 7D. I also have a Red Scarlet. Everything plays back great. It's just when it comes to transcoding that H.264 footage, it really takes a lot of graphics processing power to do that. So we'll come back when this footage gets transcoded to a QuickTime 422. Okay, it looks like we got our video transcoded. You can see that I have these two new video files. They're pretty big. They're about 15 gigs each. The original compressed versions were only about 2.2 gigs, 2.5 gigs. So you can see that, if you did this with Cineform, they're going to be huge, pretty big files too. but I can play these videos back a lot easier. So let's jump over to Premiere. We're gonna open up Premiere CS6, and we're gonna set up a new project once we get loaded, and we're gonna import our footage and interpret our footage so it's gonna be in the correct frame rate. So we're gonna select a new project. We're gonna save it. And now we're going to select our first sequence. So we got a lot of presets over here. It doesn't really matter necessarily what preset you use. The main thing is just edit in the dimensions you want and the frame rates you want. So I could choose an AVC HD, 1080p, 30 frames a second, or I could do that on there's a bunch of other presets that are similar to that under different codec settings. The reason why we're editing in 30 frames a second, or at least I choose to edit in 30 frames a second, is that if you look at your GoPro footage on a bright sunny day and you're filming and you freeze frame, you're going to notice that it has almost no motion blur in the frame. So if you're edit back in say a 24 frames per second timeline, you're going to get a lot more of a staccato, jumpy look. So the extra frames in 30 frames a second just kind of smooths that out because there's not a lot of motion blur in the footage. So you kind of need more frames to make up for that. So I would say 30 frames is better than 24 frames a second. But if you're able to get an ND filter on your GoPro and maybe create some motion blur with a slower shutter speed, 24 might be a good option then. Never edit in 60 frames a second. That's not a delivery format. No one's going to watch it back at 60 frames a second. 30 frames or 24. Stick to those. So we're going to import our footage. We're going to import our new QuickTime footage. Let me just... So we import our footage, and right off the bat we have 2 clips and a sequence. So we click on a clip, we see that it's 1920 by 1080, good. The frame rate's 59.94, 60 frames a second. What we need to do to start editing is we need to interpret these video clips so that instead of playing back at 60 frames a second, they play back at 30 frames a second to match our timeline or sequence. So what that does is when we convert it down to 30 frames a second, it's actually going to make the video twice as long. So right now it says it's at, I think, 6 minutes and 44 seconds. So if we right click, go to modify, interpret footage, assume this frame rate of 29.97. If you're unsure what frame rate you should be using to match your sequence, just click on your sequence and it will tell you right there. But if we go back to our clip, it went from about 6 minutes and 45 seconds to 13 minutes and 28 seconds. You don't have to do this per clip. You can highlight both clips or all your clips you have and right click, interpret, and do 29.97 again. And that's how you kind of do them all pretty fast. So this is cool. We got our clips ready to start editing. So at this point, I usually go through the footage and try to find some shots I like, mix it with some music. So this shot's pretty cool with the sun going down. We got a little turn there. Don't like the turn. I'm just going to quickly grab some clips out of this footage and drop it into the timeline. Okay, I got about 4 clips that we can play around with here in the Premiere sequence. Looking at this, there's a couple shots going up, a couple lifts. Here's a shot of the beach. Not every shot needs to be stabilized when you're going through your footage, but it looks like I'm going to try to stabilize most of these clips using the warp stabilizer plugin in not in After Effects, in Premiere. What we're going to do is we're going to come up to our effects panel and start typing the word warp, and we get the word warp stabilizer on the effects. We can drag it onto our clip. It's going to start analyzing that. If we go over to our effects control, we can see more specifically what that plugin is doing. It's analyzing about 10% so far of the clip, and after it analyzes, it's going to stabilize, and we can adjust the smoothness of this video after it's done analyzing. Right now it's going to be about 50%, and if your clip ends up being a little too stabilized looking, like it's kind of like shifting it around in a bad way, sometimes it's good to turn the smoothness down to about 30%, 20%, or even 10%. Could make it just a little bit better. So we just got done stabilizing this first clip. You can see there's this red bar here above it, meaning it kind of needs to be rendered, but we can still play it back pretty good. If I need to adjust the settings of this clip, I would adjust the smoothness value, maybe bring it down to 30%, and you can see it's going to restabilize it. It doesn't need to reanalyze the clip, it's just going to restabilize it, which doesn't take too long. If you have a bunch of clips that you need to add the warp stabilizer to, instead of dragging the warp stabilizer on to each clip, you can highlight all the clips you want to add it to and just double click the effect, and now we're adding the warp stabilizer to every single clip. Let's say you're editing, and we're going to remove those effects real fast. Let's say we're editing, and this shot right here, is a really cool shot of the beach and stuff, but for whatever reason, you don't want it to be half speed. You don't want it to be playing back at 30 frames a second. You want the full speed. So the best way to do this is to right click your clip and just go to speed duration and change this to 150 or 200% to speed it up so it looks a little more real time. So this is closer to real-time playback. You can try adding your warp stabilizer effect to that, but what it's going to do is going to say, hey, warp stabilizer speed can't be used on the same clip. So the workaround to this problem is to undo your speed change to your clip, right-click your clip, and what we're going to do is we're going to nest this clip into its own sequence. So we're going to nest it. We created a new sequence, nested sequence 1. We can open that, and you can see we just have our clip in it. What we're going to do is add the warp stabilizer to that nested sequence clip. We're going to stabilize in there, and then we're going to go back to our main sequence, right click the clip, then add our speed change of about 150. So you can see now we're still going to be able to use the warp stabilizer. It just needs to analyze the clip at the original frame rate. So another thing you can do is, instead of adding just a overall speed change to the whole clip, we can change it back to 100%. We can actually do some time remapping, which is a fancy way of saying changing the speed throughout the clip. So what I mean by that is, say we're going to start, we want this lift to go really fast, and then we want to slow down like right about here to the half speed that we're currently at. If we click right here on the opacity, we have this drop down for our clips to do time remapping speed. And you kind of need this little checkbox or caret check down to see that. So about right here, we want it to go fast and then slow down right there to half speed playback. So we're gonna do a control click or a command click onto this, and basically to the right, or here, let me start re-explain that. Basically this line is at 100% speed playback. Anything up is faster, anything below is slower, and we just set a keyframe right here in the middle. So what we can do is take the beginning of the clip, increase the speed to say 200% ish. Made our clip shorter, which makes sense because now this is going faster and then this is still the same length. And now we start going fast and then slows down. Now we can drag these two guys out right here, which is actually going to not make the speed change so abrupt. You can see it's changing this line to an angle. So now it's going to be more of a speed ramp. So we're going normal speed or fast speed, and then we're going to start slowing down, and then we're back to half speed. So that's how we do some of the speed ramps. And if you notice that this needs to be in the nested sequence, you can't do a speed ramp or a time remapping effect on a clip like so and drop the warp stabilizer plugin onto that, because it's the same way that the time remapping can't be used on the same clips, same as with changing the speed percentage. At this point, you guys been able to, transcode your footage, import your footage, apply warp stabilizer to the clips that you want to. Again, not every clip really needs it, just depends upon how stable it is. And also, use warp stabilizer. Don't just apply it to the whole footage, because there's going to be chances when you're flying and you get like a really rough wind blown, or you did a quick move, or you're just a little choppy on the flight controls, and that up and down dip or extreme move is not going to go well with the warp stabilizer. So I always open up my clips, pick the ones I want, drop them into the timeline, stabilize the ones I only want. It saves a lot of time for processing. After you got your edit done with some stabilization, the last thing we usually do is do a little bit of color correction and try to just remove some of the fisheye out of the GoPro. And we do that by using the Magic Bullet Looks plugin. We added it to this clip that's still being stabilized. We're going to go to our effects control panel and edit our look. And this is going to launch the Magic Bullet Looks program. So right off the bat, some things that I do is I go over to my right and I'm going to go to my lens and I'm going to add the lens distortion filter, and automatically it makes it more fisheye looking. You can change the distortion by moving this value over here. I like to do something around -25. Oops. Let's see if I can type that in. -25. And you can enable and disable that effect if you need to. You can see it actually is stretching out that analyzed background blue band, but it's actually kind of making the GoPro footage less distorted. You may notice that on my lens on the right, it's a little bit foggy right here. Belize is actually really humid, and there's several times that my GoPro just fogged up with moisture on the inside. So that was kind of a bummer. But another thing to note is I have these scopes over here open on the left. You can also hover over the left and get to some presets. Now, color correcting, the reason why I mentioned the scopes is because color correcting is a way to set the mood, and it is to convey the way, what you're trying to show to an audience. I don't like to go to the extreme grades that, some people do. Just because you can doesn't mean you should necessarily. We like to keep it kind of clean and kind of like highlight the areas and to make it, realistic looking. You can go, get some presets, some nasty presets on the side, and, get all funky with some stuff if you want. There's some good starting points, but, like zombies, you can have a little zombie effect. But what I usually do is checking out the scopes. We can kind of do some image balancing and just add some overall contrast to the scene. We can go to the post tab, add a colorista 3-way is a good one. Open this up. We can, look at where our blacks are, where our highlights are, where our midtones are. Maybe I just want to add a little bit more contrast to this scene. Give it more like a sunsetty feel. We can also increase maybe the warmth in the highlights, even give it a little bit more warmth in the midtones, and maybe we could just give it a little bit more of a cinematic feel. We'll pull down some blues in the shadows. So we can, before, after, not a huge change, but there's some more contrast, there's some warmth in there. It looks a little more sunsetty like. I kind of like that. That's just something really simple you can do. So cool. Let's leave that where it's at. We're going to click finish. So our video is looking, we can disable looks, re-enable. I like how that's looking. Now the last thing I do with my footage is I add a unsharp mask to the GoPro footage. When you're filming in Pro Tune mode, the image is a little bit less sharp because it's not being processed as much in the camera, so it's leaving a lot of things for post-production work to do that normally is done in the camera. Just adding a little bit of sharpening to your footage can make it look a little sharper. One thing is, a lot of times you do this color correction, the looks and the mask, the unsharp mask, to a lot of clips in your timeline. And you can highlight each of these effects by just control clicking or command clicking on them and copying and highlighting your clips and pasting them. But one cool thing in the new Premiere CS6 is we can actually create a new adjustment layer. If you're familiar with After Effects, you know what adjustment layers are, but basically adjustment layer is a blank layer that has nothing on it, but it takes your effects and applies them to the clips below them. So instead of applying these effects to all my clips one at a time, I can just add one adjustment layer, add my effects to it. Now you can see my nested sequence clip has double the effects because there's one on the original and one on the adjustment layer, but I can disable the original ones. And now all my clips have the same effects, the same color correction, the same sharpening. And if I needed to adjust any of those values, I can adjust them across the whole timeline. I'm going to remove this warp stabilizer effect and show you how we can export our clips. All we need to do is go File, Export, Media. Most of the time you're delivering for the web, for the internet. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to an H.264 format, which is a delivery format. So we're going to click on our format up here in our export settings and go H.264. And then it's real easy from here. There's tons of presets down here. I would suggest going to a Vimeo 1080p 30 or a YouTube 1080p 30 setting. So here's a YouTube HD 1080p 29.97. Click on that. And basically, that's all you needed to do. Just save where you want to save it. And then just hit export and it will start exporting your clip. And that's a file that you would actually upload to YouTube or Vimeo. So that's it. We're done. Thanks for watching this tutorial. If you have any questions about post-production work, I'd be happy to help you out. You can just email me directly at wes, W-E-S, at XProHeli.com. Hope you have fun flying. Thanks. Bye.